The human brain is not particularly huge when we compare it to the size of our overall body. It is very large compared to other species, but in regard to the rest of our body, it's maybe only 2 or 3% of the total mass. However, it's going to be requiring almost a sixth of the total cardiac output, or the blood coming out of our heart, and it can use up to 1/5 of the total oxygen content within that blood. So this is a highly metabolic organ. In order to provide the brain with all of that blood that it requires, there are two dominant routes to bring blood to the brain. The internal carotid artery, located more anteriorly, and the vertebral artery, located more posteriorly. Let's first take a look at the path of the internal carotid artery to enter the skull. If I were to fade the different bones here surrounding this region, we can see that the internal carotid artery actually turns medially within the bone. At the base of the skull, the internal carotid artery enters a space known as the carotid canal. This is going to be located within the temporal bone. At this point, it's going to course medially and horizontally and then ascend up into the skull just superior to the foramen lacerum. At this point, the internal carotid artery is going to take a curve within the skull itself, and this will be within a space known as the cavernous sinus. So the internal carotid artery still has not branched as it's coming up through this space, and then it curves back on itself where it is now going to join with the circle of Willis, the arterial cerebral circle that is going to supply blood to the brain tissue. The alternate route into the brain is going to be for the vertebral artery. Now, the vertebral artery bilaterally ascended up through the transverse foramina of the cervical vertebrae. Those are also going to curve medially just at the base of the skull, where they then ascend up through the largest opening in the skull, the foramen magnum. Once the vertebral arteries have entered the skull within the posterior cranial fossa, they are going to join together to form the basilar artery. So the right vertebral artery and the left vertebral artery join to make the basilar artery. Clinically, it's important to understand which aspects of the brain get blood supply from which vessel. The vertebral artery is going to supply the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the occipital lobe of the cerebrum, while the internal carotid artery is going to supply the temporal lobes, the frontal lobes, and the parietal lobes along the midline. So remember that the two dominant blood vessels that bring blood to the brain are the internal carotid artery and the vertebral artery.